did the first taxonomy papers back in the 70s, and so we're extremely lucky to have him here speaking to us here at MPG Labs. So let's give a warm welcome.
He forgot one important aspect of his introduction. See this name right here?
I can't see
That's that gentleman right there.
Oh, I know that.
So, he set this all up.
Thank you.
I'm sort of a bystander. I woke up about 3 nights ago and realized I didn't have a title for this thing. So I joshed around with titles. I talked to Ryan. The title is Reality versus Perceptions. Subtitle, maybe I better put my glasses on. 5 decades of pursuing a hobby. First, I want to ask the audience some questions because I want to learn something about the audience. And I want to tell you a little bit about me. I have divided this talk into phases, and I'd hope to be able to maybe cut it down some so we can get out to eating. Or you've already had something to eat, haven't you? I want to relate how I got started in this species, and then as a former teacher, I have a lecture to give, a lesson. Now, this may take some time. When I get down to phase 81, wait a minute. I think we ought to take a break by, oh, that's 31. So sorry. That doesn't seem right either. Wait a minute here. Oh, phase 13. Oh, you can relax now, I guess. It won't take as long as I thought. Questions? How many of you have a biological background or consider themselves biologists? Raise your hands. Okay. Any herpetologists amongst you, amateur or professional?
Me and Dad are professionals.
I'm an amateur, so. Raise your hand if you've ever heard or been informed that the rubber boa is rare.
I've never heard of it.
Okay. How many of you have seen a rubber boa in the wild? Ear-red roadkill. Oh, good. That's great.
Roadkill, yeah.
How many of you seen a gopher snake or a bull snake in the wild? Just about as many, okay? And last, raise your hand if you are a birder or have been bird watching or know something about birds. Okay. I have no formal education in herpetology. I have no advanced degree. I have no professional affiliation. So you're talking to a rank amateur, or you're having a rank amateur talk to you. I once took a 2-credit course in herpetology my freshman year, the spring of 1952, and that's it. My background education, I have a bachelor's degree in wildlife science, graduated in '55, Oregon State University. In '72, I ended up getting teaching credentials, but I have a second bachelor's degree in secondary science education. In college, I was in ROTC, ended up flying aircraft in the Air Force. I was a bush pilot for 4 years, flying the last 3 years as a helicopter pilot in Alaska and Canada. I then got out of flying, became a biological technician for the USDA entomology research in Corvallis. And that was where I got my first taste of research. And I just love discovery, the discovery process. My last employment was, however, as a secondary science teacher, school teacher, and I retired end of October 1991. I once had 6 hobbies. Started out birding as a 4th grader, then started chasing snakes, falconry, fishing, basketball, and tennis. I'm now back at 82, I'm back down to chasing snakes and falconry. The neat thing about both hobbies is they both provide challenges and something to learn something new. Phase 3. We're on the phase 3 now. My continued involvement with rubber boa began in 1962. large female boa was given to me by a kid that at a lab picnic in Avery Park, a large park in Corvallis, and then that September, a fellow lab worker gave me a immature male from Central Oregon, and I had success maintaining those two species for the next 3 years. And in 1965, the male had reached mature status, and I noted him in the spring trying courting the female. And it was at that point in time I threw all my other hobbies and herpetology out the window and decided to concentrate strictly on finding all I could about the rubber boa. And so my inception in this study began essentially in 1965. So I started making searches in 65, 66, 67 for the rare rubber boa and didn't find a single one. Then in 1968 I ended up with 5. In 1969 I then ended up with 59. So what's the difference? Well, as some of you may know or not know, in herpetology, the conventional wisdom where you find snakes is when it's warm and sunny. And that's when I was making my searches during 65, 66, and 67 and not finding anything. Finally, in 1968, I started going out when it wasn't sunny and warm, and I began to have success. And that continued in 1969. Then in 69, I employed 2 secret weapons, which I have brought with me.
The rubber boas. Let me guess.
These are miniatures of what I use. Plywood board, roofing tin. Besides making searches at all times of the year, in grassland habitat where you can't find anything by walk, just like the ranch property, grassland habitat, nothing to turn. The ranch does have some rock. In Willamette Valley in Western Oregon, you don't have anything to turn. When you start putting out these secret weapons on grassland habitat, not just the rubber boa, but all the species of snakes, all the small mammals, just about everything, ants. No butterflies, however. Then I might mention that a third secret weapon I learned to use in 1993-94 is carpet. Carpet is I use on rock outcrops. Roofing tins, plywood board doesn't work so well, but carpet works exceedingly well in finding the target species, in that case rubber boas. Mountain king snakes, as a matter of fact, on rock and rock outcrops. So I realized at the time that the conventional wisdom of finding snakes during warm, sunny weather was flawed, badly flawed for some species. It works perfectly well for racers, gopher snakes, some garter snakes, but not well for other species of snakes like the rubber boa, sharp-tailed snake, which you don't have here, and other species. Phase, you have, next I want, what I have, my list of published papers. I'm going to go down a few of these during the talk, mainly starting out with the one I have reprints over here if anybody wants one extras. I have extra reprints of the one that has to do sharp-tailed snakes, the discovery of a new species, if somebody wishes to have them after the talk. So in 68 I found 5. I probably retained those 5. I've got to do some memory here. 69 with 59 rubber boas, well, you can't retain that many rubber boas. And so the very next phase was to be able to mark them and release them, and then hopefully recapture them so you can learn something about longevity, growth, and that sort of good information. So I had to devise a natural tagging system. And in this 1974 publication, I got to backtrack a bit. When I decided in 65 to investigate the rubber boa, I went to the Oregon State University Library and looked up all the literature you could on the rubber boa, which lasted maybe 3 or 4 days at the most. Copied all the reprints. Almost all of it was scientific notes or shorter communications, as they say now, and most of it dealt with taxonomy, how to tell one subspecies from another. At the time, there were 3 subspecies: Great Great Basin rubber boa, which was supposed to be here, east of the Cascade and the Sierra Nevadas; the Pacific rubber boa, which is the west of the 2 crested mountains to the Pacific Ocean, and the southern rubber boa found in Southern California. So getting familiar with what was involved with taxonomy, I then devised this collection data sheet, which I record for every single specimen I have. I'm going to cut it short. If you have questions afterwards, trust me, I know what I'm doing. Figures 5 and 6, you already put those. Do you put the anomalies on? Okay. Males and females, I had the kids bring 2, a male and a female around to show you early. Males have spurs that are visible, but they're small in relation to the snake, but they're visible. They have sort of a downward curve here. They're used in courtship. Females generally have spurs too, but they're either hidden underneath scales, and if they're present, they're a different shape and much smaller in relation to the size. So you can tell males from female boas much more readily than you can any other species of snake. And that, all the boas are that way, and the pythons are, by the way. You can sex them almost immediately by the presence of spurs or the absence of visible spurs, or the shape of the spurs. So the most noteworthy discoveries that I published in that 1974 paper, that I believe, one is the use of artificial cover objects in order to acquire a research sample. To my knowledge, I don't think it had ever been done before. The next year, Dr. Henry Fitch, University of Kansas, described his discovery of using an artificial cover as a means of acquiring a research sample. For a species that was considered to be rare from 65 boas in 1968 through 1973, because I published the next year in 74, my sample ended up at 338 rubber boas, a little over 50 per year. I devised a natural tagging system where I could tell one specimen from the other, just like human fingerprints, only this system is better than human fingerprints. There's such large genetic variation in this species, in its head scalation, body scalation, that no 2 are alike, so I can tag them naturally.
You see here, this supralabial comes clear up to the suture line here on the number 1, whereas on this side you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 come clear up to the suture line. And on the right and left side you'll have variability in each of those.
This one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3. They vary in the number as well as the specificity. I'm not going to dwell on that unless people have questions afterward, but I can tag them so I can, when I recapture them, I can tell one specimen from the other. Another, I don't know, we have that. Another discovery was that the fact that by not following conventional wisdom, I started making searches during the winter months. And so I have found specimens every month of the year. Up to 1974, I had not found any during December, but since that time I have. And then the last thing that or next to last thing I discovered or quoted in the paper or mentioned in the paper is I discovered why these things have a blunt tail. What's the function of a blunt tail, whereas the racers have a long, slim tail? So you can ask me about that later too if we have question and answer period. I'll just mention that in earlier literature there was the speculation that the blunt tail was used as a defense against predators, and it may still be. I can't discount, but that's not the major function of a blunt tail. The other discovery was that the subspeciation did not work. About 40% of the boas on the west side of the Cascade Range, which would be Pacific rubber boas, keyed out to be the Great Basin rubber boa. So I'll briefly mention that a graduate student at Oregon State liked what he saw in my paper, and we went ahead and got all the preserved specimens from Montana, Idaho, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia, surveyed them, and sure enough, the Great Basin and the Pacific rubber boas didn't work as taxonomically. It's been discarded by the community. So we published that in also late 1974, Nussbaum and Hoyer. Fast forward to 1990. In about August that year, I got a telephone call from a Dr. Richard Ross, Stanford University, asked if I might give a presentation on rubber boa reproduction at the 15th International Symposium on Captive Propagation and Husbandry, scheduled for June 20th to 23rd in the Seattle area, 1991. I agreed. Slide number 10. Through 1990, my sample had gone from the 338 in 1974 to 1,167. The interesting thing about this slide, to me at the time, was that you can see here the non-adult males were outnumbered by non-adult females, but the females were less than the males in adult section. I should have pointed out in 1974 that also occurred. Non-adult females outnumber non-adult males, but the reverse is true in the adult section. This slide shows the number of litters that were examined. 378. I got them from 15 captive females. One captive female produced 10 litters for me over about a 20-something year span. 228 females produced these number of litters. One female that was captured a number of times produced 6 litters for me. The number of neonates that were produced by those females, in those 378 litters, was 1,468. Again, the breakdown of sex, you can see here again that neonate or newborn females greatly outnumbered males, newborn males, at the 3%. That was significant at the 3% level. Now, I don't do statistics, so I had a gentleman in Fisheries and Wildlife do the statistics for me. Now, I have some reasons, some speculation as to why more females are produced than males, but I'm going to leave that because it is just speculation. I like to really deal morely in facts, mostly in facts. The average litter size generally is 2 to 8, or 2 to 8, but we've had some litters where the female produced just one. Every time they produce just one neonate, there's usually 1 or 2 ova or passed along with it. And in recent years, we've had a couple of females produce 9, and last year, one female produced 10 neonates. So even though the literature will say rubber boas, young produced per female 2 to 8, it's really 1 to 10 now. Average litter size is, I think from this population was 4.3 young per female. So how often do females reproduce? Well, let me first of all get to this, back to the slide you had there, Ryan. This slide shows that the average, the dates that the females produce, parturition is called, mainly in September. The next slide. The normal way that other herpetologists have found out litter frequency is to collect their sample and check the number of non-gravid females versus gravid females. And if you do that with rubber boa, is 50-50. Half of them are gravid any year you capture them, other ones half are not, which says that the litter frequency is once every other year. But that didn't resonate in me. That didn't make sense. It made sense to me that maybe gravid females are found more frequently than non-gravid females, and that has turned out to be the case when you examine at the recapture data. So the N stands for a female that's been recaptured, but's non-gravid, gravid in 1982, non-gravid 83, 84, and so forth. And then I have some little small n's here. I inserted those where I know the species was not gravid. And I know that because the greatest frequency of litter frequency is once every other year. So in this particular female, it was non-gravid, was captured. Since it was gravid this year in 82, it couldn't have been gravid there, so I extrapolated an N. Same with here. When you do this, you find out that the average litter frequency is 1 litter every 3 to 4 years. So if they only produce 1 litter every 4 years and only about 4 offspring per litter, that means they only produce about 1 baby rubber boa per reproductive effort. That is like lions and tigers, wolves. Very low reproductive output.
Not like wolves, but
It also then
grizzly bears.
it also indicates long-lived species. And I'll get to that maybe a little bit later. Number needs be people. Phase 11. Backtrack to 1970. No, I got one more thing to say about this reproduction thing. I get down from the audience after I give this spiel about reproduction. Man comes by the name of Scott Solar, comes up and introduces himself to me. And he says he and his buddy traveled from West Covina, California, all the way up to Seattle to hear me talk. That's about 1,400 miles. The reason he says is because when I published in 74 and mentioned I had found 338 rubber boas in that publication, I was the laughingstock of the herp community down in Southern California. Nobody could collect 338 rubber boas of this rare species. They all knew it was rare. And they came to, when they saw that I was giving a talk in Seattle on reproduction, they drove all the way up, and he came, he says, before this large audience, I know you couldn't have been falsifying that information, 1,167 or what it is by that time. And he also said, well, he had a male rubber boa, could he get a female? So he came down 2 days later and we ended up finding a female for him. So that was sort of an interesting side note from that particular time period in time. So I'm going to backtrack to 1970. I met a Dr. Glenn Stewart, got his PhD at Oregon State under herpetologist Dr. Glenn Storm, and then Dr. Stewart was then at California Polytechnic Institute at Pomona, California, and got involved with the southern rubber boa subspecies found east of Los Angeles in the San Bernardino and San Jacinto Mountains. In 1973, he sent me data on 19 preserved southern rubber boas, and the size of those rubber boas range from about 11 inches to 19 3/4 inches. And that struck me as odd. If you had a random sample of 19 rubber boas from Montana, I would bet you, but Oregon anyway, you'd had specimens 22, 23, 24 inches long. So I wrote back to him, I said, Doc, I wonder if the southern rubber boa would be a dwarf form of the species. So in 1991, October, I retired, as I mentioned, and in the early 1992, I wrote Dr. Stewart a letter asking me if I'd like to participate in a study of the southern rubber boa, and he accepted. I had 4 goals. One was to collect all I could about the life history of the southern rubber boa. Nothing had ever been published about it except its distribution and the fact that it was rare. Possibly determine if the southern rubber boa was in fact dwarf, possibly shed light on its numerical abundance, was it in fact rare, and gather information on a taxonomic nature that could probably be compared with other boa populations in Southern California and elsewhere. So happens back in 1971, California Department of Fish and Wildlife determined that the southern rubber boa was rare, and they listed it officially as rare, designated as protected. And then in 1983, they changed it to the rare to threatened to conform to federal designation and terminology. Dr. Stewart thought it was rare, and I didn't know one way or the other. I'm one of these persons that is on the fence. I wait to let the data tell its own story. I didn't accept people's perceptions whether it was rare or not. So I've missed something. I want to go back a little bit. I've got this lecture I was going to give. I think I'll go ahead and do it. Can you backtrack to the Audubon Society bird count? Being one of my hobbies it was birding to begin with. I stopped birding when my hearing became so poorly that I couldn't go to the Audubon bird counts and hear any birds any longer. And being a falconer, I'm always into falconry, so I have an example I want to give here. If you go birding, and most of you rose your hands, I suspect that most of you would believe that the red-tailed hawk is probably more numerous than the sharp-shinned hawk. When I went out birding, you'd see red-tails routinely, sharp-shinned rarely, if ever. And so then if you go out on the Audubon bird counts, you find out that turns out to be the case. These are random counts from Oregon, Washington, I see Nebraska. Then you end up with, this is, I think the data was from 2014 because they didn't have, when I went, didn't have the 2015 data yet. So you can see 2,633 red-tailed hawks on Audubon bird counts in 47. And that would be all across the northern tier states. That would be exactly the same, no matter what kind of data you show. Red-tailed hawk, much more numerous than sharp-shinned hawks. But biologically, that doesn't really set well with me. Why would a larger species be more numerous than a smaller species? Elk aren't more numerous than deer, and deer aren't more numerous than rabbits, and rabbits aren't more numerous than field mice. So when you look into that, red tails have a large prey base, which is mostly small mammals or anything they get their talons on, really. Sharpshins have a pretty large prey base because they feed on small birds primarily. So next slide will show why perceptions can be erroneous. I went through and found the migratory bird raptor counts, all from Montana, and here's from Bonnie Butte, Oregon. And you'll notice the totals here. Over 4,000 sharp-shinned hawks, a little less than 2,000 red-tailed hawks in Montana. That would be the same scenario across the northern tier states during the migratories. Bonnie Butte, the same thing, 265 to 195. Now there's caveats in both of those types of counts, the Audubon count and then the migratory bird counts. There's biases involved. But this should prove to any objective individual that the sharp-shinned hawk is generally more numerous than the red-tailed hawk. And I'm trying to, and this whole talk is going to be centered essentially the same situation occurs with the rubber boa that's considered rare. So if I go back now to where I last left off here. So in 1993, I started a study of the southern rubber boa. I was told by one of Dr. Stewart's students that the best time to search for him is May. So I ended up coming down in mid-May, ungodly warm. I spent 10 days there, drove through looking at the habitat, assessing the prey base, didn't find a single rubber boa, southern rubber boa. Then I ended up going down to, in 1994, I ended up going in mid-April, second week of April, spent 3 weeks, worked my tail off, set up lots of artificial cover, search, came up with one single southern rubber boa. I get back to Oregon in both in 1993, 1994, I write Dr. Stewart. I think I had email by then. I'm enthused about the project. They've got, the rubber boas got great habitat, good prey base, they have to occur at normal densities in relation to the environmental conditions that are there in the habitat. So I ended up knowing that I've gone a little bit too late. Conditions weren't quite right. I was still learning. I get down there March 31st, 1995. It's a Friday. I get there a little before 6 p.m. The only perk I had on that study is that the Forest Service at the Arrowhead Ranger Station allowed me to stay overnight in their fire barracks. And I can get there on a Friday after 5. I'm going to have to sleep in the back of my truck for the weekend. But I go to the headquarters building, knock on the door, and lo and behold, a woman opens a door. Which sort of surprised me. And I said, well, I tell her who I am. I'm Richard Hoyer. I'm from Boas and Bob. And she says, oh, I know who you are. Why are you here? She exclaimed, very much surprised that I had showed up. And the reason was I was a laughing stock of the entire Forest Service compound. All the biologists, management personnel, support personnel, fire crews. Here's this boa guy from Oregon, in 2 years comes back with one southern rubber boa. Obviously it's rare. Dr. Stewart still considered it rare. In the next 2 weeks, I found 27 southern rubber boas, which equaled the same number that was all the voucher specimens and preserved in collections at institutional records. In the next 2 years, I found another group, so that my total sample ended up at 83 initial captures, 21 recapture events for 104 rare southern rubber boas. I had 4 goals when I went. I mentioned the 4 goals, and the first goal about whether the species gaining life history information. We established the prey base at 8, as well as small mammals at 8 lizards and lizard eggs and snake eggs. I identified various components of weight loss during the reproduction. Found out the ring-necked snake and the common king snake were predators of the rubber boa. I didn't test southern rubber boas, but I tested local Oregon boas with those predators, and unfortunately, both of them consumed, especially the ring-necked snake was a little bit of a surprise. Not really, but I established or confirmed that they were predators of rubber boas. And I identified that species of Sorex, the shrews, Microtus, the voles, and Peromyscus, the deer mice, white-footed mouse complex, are antagonists. Antagonists are species that don't prey on rubber boas, but will attack them and cause damage. In some case, will actually kill them. Your ground squirrel probably does that here locally. What is it?